Good day, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the channel. And today we are going to be doing an honest review of the 2024 Road Glide. Now, you may ask, why are you doing a review of a Road Glide? Because I am admittedly not a bagger guy. Well, I was out at my local dealership, Prairie Harley Davidson in Regina, Saskatchewan. Independent dealership, locally owned, family operated. Anyway, I was mentioning to them that I just didn't get why everybody was buying baggers these days. So they said, you know what? Why don't you take one out and find out for yourself? And they didn't have to ask me twice. Now, I'm under no obligation to say a rave review about this bike. If I don't like something about it, I'm going to say it. If I like something about it, well, vice versa, I'll say that too. But before we get to the review, we've got to look at a viewer bike. And this is Rockin' Rod's 2020 Fat Boy from Down Under. This bike has a custom 131 cubic inch engine pushing 160 for both torque and horsepower to the rear wheel. Fueling Reaper 538 cam and cam chest, Screaming Eagle cylinders, 12-to-1 high compression pistons, ported and polished heads, Screaming Eagle 64mm throttle body. The injectors have been upgraded. He's got an upgraded compensator and sprocket in the primary, a Recluse clutch and basket, Jekyll and Hyde 2-in-1 exhaust, blacked out wheels, and a Saddleman Renegade solo seat. And I'm sure I have missed some things because there's a lot of work done to this bike. But thanks, Rod, down in Australia, for sending me a picture or pictures of his bike. And if you want to see your bike on the channel, send me a pic. My email address is in the description of this video. And now, let's get to our review. Well, here we are, Prairie Harley Davidson, and here is the 2024 Road Glide. Now, before we get started, I have to make a confession. I was a little tentative about taking this bike out. The reason being, I have not been on a large touring motorcycle in years. Also, it's pretty damn windy today, which is pretty much as per usual around here these days. Those two things combined were in the back of my mind. However, it turned out to be much ado about nothing. But let's get into a few specs before we head out on the road. The Road Glide has 8 color options for this year. This particular model is the Vivid Black, which is an upcharge now. The bike also comes in 2 trims, chrome and black. The 2024 Road Glide features the 117 cubic inch Milwaukee 8 engine. This motor has liquid-cooled heads and puts out 105 horsepower and 130 foot-pounds of torque. The seat height is 26.6 inches with a ground clearance of 5.7 inches. The bike has a length of 94.9 inches or just short of 8 feet. It has a rake of 26 degrees, trail of 6.8, and a 64-inch wheelbase. It has a 6-gallon fuel tank with an estimated 44 miles per gallon. The Road Glide weighs in at 838 pounds wet weight, so she is not a light bike. 6-speed transmission and a 2-in-1-2 dual exhaust. We have LED lighting all around and Skyline OS infotainment center with a 12.3-inch TFT full-color screen. A 2-speaker 50-watt per channel stereo, dual disc brakes in the front, single in the rear, cast aluminum wheels, a 19 in the front and an 18 in the rear. It's got a 32-degree lean angle on either side. But I really could go on and on listing features and specs, so let's just get on it and see how she rides. So you may be asking why I decided to do a review specifically on the Road Glide. Well, I thought if I was going to get a bagger with a fairing anyway, what would I get? And out of the 3, Street Glide, Road Glide, and the Ultra, I found the Road Glide to be the one I liked the most stylistically. I like the look of the shark nose fairing over the Batwing. I also like what they did with both the Road Glide and the Street Glide when they updated both models to the CVO styling of last year. The one thing I'm not really a big fan of, however, is the look of the air cleaner. It just looks a little strange to me. So the first thing I noticed on this bike was the weight and the center of gravity once I lifted it off of the side stand. As I mentioned earlier, this is an 838-pound bike, so it should be obvious that I would notice the difference coming off my 700-pound fat boy to this. I'm also going to be sitting a little higher than usual, but that being said, you don't really notice the weight once you get on the road, except perhaps for slower speed turns. Other than that, this bike handles very well. It's also nice to have several more degrees of lean angle compared to my Fat Boy. The second thing that I noticed pretty quickly when I came to a stop was that this engine is rubber mounted. The bike had a good amount of vibration when stopped. Not a lot, but definitely noticeable. A rubber-mounted engine will have a good amount of shake when sitting still, but give it a little gas and it smooths right out. So when this bike is moving, there is very little, if any, vibration at all. It's actually a very smooth ride on the highway, just kind of shaky when you're at a stop. Now, speaking of the engine, I was pleasantly surprised by the power delivery. This bike has 4 modes: rain, road, sport, and custom. And I tried them all except for the custom, as I wasn't going to fool around with the settings that much. Rain mode is a little subdued for obvious reasons. Road is a good all-around setting, and sport gives a pretty snappy throttle response and gets up to speed pretty quick. I spent most of my time in sport mode, of course, for obvious reasons. Now, I had a 117 engine on my Lowrider S, and I actually expected this bike to be slower as it outweighs that bike by around 160 pounds. But this bike was every bit as fast and responsive, and I have to say that was a very pleasant surprise. One thing that was a disappointment was the stereo. Now, this was something I was looking forward to trying, as I don't ride bikes with stereos usually, so it would be something a little new to me. Harley always seems to make a big deal about the systems in these bikes, and the sound was more than sufficient at low speeds, even through a full-face helmet, but as soon as you get to highway speed, forget about it. If I was going with the wind, even with the stereo just about cranked, I could just barely make out the sound. And against the wind, I could pretty much hear nothing at all. If this were my bike and I wanted music, I definitely would not spend any money upgrading the stereo. I would just get something so that I could listen to the music in my helmet. Speaking of the wind that I mentioned earlier, I had said in the beginning that I was a little concerned being on this bike in this higher wind with having little experience on it. Well, that was not an issue at all. It was pretty windy today, which made excellent conditions to test this out. In a good crosswind, I found this bike to stay planted, and I'm sure that extra weight helped, but nonetheless, getting blown around was not an issue. Heading into the wind, I would say the fairing was adequate. It did its job, but I wouldn't say it was absolutely fantastic or anything like that. Comfort-wise, I would give this bike an A+. It was a very nice ride. The stock seat was comfortable, much better than my stock Fat Boy seat, that's for sure. It also had a little lower back support, which is always nice. My feet were planted in a good position on the floorboards, and at about 6 feet tall, the stock mini apes were in a nice position for my arms. They may not be for everybody, but for my size, they worked very nicely. Basically, it had the feeling of sitting in a nice, comfy chair, and I could definitely see being able to spend hours in the saddle without much issue. As far as the suspension and braking go, to be honest, I did not find it any better or any worse than my Fat Boy, and that's not meant to be an insult. It stopped fine when I needed it to, and it took the bumps in the road nicely. And that goes pretty much the same for the shifting. It was pretty much right on par with my Fat Boy. The shifting was smooth with no issues finding neutral. Now, as for the exhaust, well, unless I was at a standstill, I pretty much couldn't hear it otherwise. It's the same as every stock Harley exhaust, muted. When you can hear it, it sounds absolutely fine. It's just very quiet. And that's not Harley's fault. That's the regulator's fault. Now, obviously, this could be fixed with a good set of aftermarket pipes. The saddlebags look good and hold up to 2.42 cubic feet of storage, which will definitely carry enough to get through at least a few day trip. They open to the outside and seem to latch pretty securely. So what's my verdict on the Road Glide? Well, let's be honest. I can only give you my opinion on this bike on what I found on the short time I was on it. After all, I did not get a chance to ride it at night to test out all the lighting, nor did I go through all the tech on this bike. I just simply did not have the time. Also, let's keep in mind that this is a stock bike. There are plenty of aftermarket parts that would make this bike even better than it is. But the main pros for me were the power delivery, especially in sport mode, and the overall comfort of the motorcycle. The cons, well, it weighs 838 pounds, so it's a pretty heavy bike that is noticeable. And the stereo was somewhat disappointing. But what I can say about this bike, it seems like it would be perfect for someone who wanted to eat up mile after mile in comfort. I could see getting on this bike and traveling across country without a problem. And I definitely can see why people would want to buy a Road Glide. Now, has this bike got me thinking of switching up and becoming a bagger guy? Well, no. I'll be sticking with my Fat Boy. And that's not because this is a bad bike. It's just because it's not for my style of riding. This bike is for someone who wants to get out on the road and just go and go and go. And I'm not much of a big traveler anymore. But for someone who is, you can't go wrong with a Road Glide. So before I end this video, I of course have to give a special thanks to Prairie Harley Davidson in Regina, Saskatchewan. They are an independently, locally owned and operated family business. And I have to say thanks for letting me take this bike out and do a review on it. I will put their contact information in the description to this video. And I'm hoping that I can get out on a few more bikes this year. I'd like to try out a street glide next just to compare it to this Road Glide and see what the differences are between the two. But anyway, that is it for today, folks. You guys stay safe out there on the road, and we will see you in the next one.